In a kingdom where loyalty means life itself, a young king hides a devastating secret. He cannot produce an heir. To protect the throne, he commands his most trusted guard to do the unthinkable: sleep with the queen. What begins as duty soon ignites a forbidden passion, one that threatens the crown, the kingdom, and the three hearts trapped in a storm of power, betrayal, and desire. This isn't just palace intrigue, it's a love triangle that will end in blood. If that setup already has you on edge, stick around, because this love triangle only gets darker. Don't forget to hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment below if you think loyalty should come before love. Now, let's dive into A Frozen Flower. The film begins with the young king of Goryeo addressing an army of 30,000 elite soldiers on the training ground. He is pleased with their discipline, skill, and loyalty. That night, the king visits the soldiers' camp after lights out. Outside, he notices one boy still training while the others sleep. The boy is Hongrim, one of the most talented among them. The king joins him, and from that night forward, he becomes drawn to Hongrim, spending more time with him. Years pass. Hongrim, now grown, leads a group of soldiers in pursuit of Han Baek, another member of the king's elite guards who is fleeing the palace with the queen's maid. They capture the pair and return them to the palace. Later that night, while attending the king, Hongrim, now the chief guard, pleads for Han Baek's life. Han Baek has broken his vow of loyalty by abandoning his sworn duty to pursue love, a crime punishable by death. The king hesitates, but after Hongrim's persuasion, he spares Han Baek. Hongrim delivers the news to the soldiers, warning them that this will be the last time such rebellion is forgiven. The men thank him for intervening and welcome Han Baek back. One soldier mocks him, suggesting that Hongrim influences the king's judgment through intimacy. Hongrim strikes him and warns him never to speak ill of the king again. Later, while serving the king, Hongrim prepares honeysuckle tea that helps ease the king's fever. The king asks if he too has ever thought of escaping the palace like Han Baek. Hongrim answers that he never would, because he is sworn to him. At that moment, the queen enters with tea for the king. He mentions that Hongrim has already given him tea, but she persuades him to try hers as well. She also reminds him that an envoy from Yuan is coming, urging him to make efforts toward producing an heir. The king and queen remain childless, and pressure mounts from both her Yuan dynasty family and the king's royal council to ensure a successor for the throne. Later, the queen summons Hongrim to thank him for saving her maid who tried to flee with Han Baek. She also cautions him against taking on duties that belong to her, warning that his service to the king could be misinterpreted. The king and queen share a meal outside the palace, enjoying the fresh air and open view. Wanting to make the moment more memorable, he asks her to sing a song he loves. The queen begins singing, and the king and his attendants listen with joy. Without warning, arrows fly in from an unknown location, forcing everyone to take cover. Armed men reveal themselves and charge forward, launching an attack. The king's elite guards rush into battle. Hongrim shields both the king and queen while assessing the fight. But as the attackers overwhelm the soldiers, some break through and move toward the royal couple. Hongrim orders his men to protect the king and queen, but the king refuses to retreat. Drawing his sword, he orders Hongrim's subordinates to escort the queen to safety instead. Hongrim tries to dissuade him, but the king is determined to fight. Together, they battle the attackers fiercely. Both sustain injuries, though the king is wounded more severely. After the battle, the king's counselors scold Hongrim for failing to protect him. When the king regains consciousness, he summons Hongrim. Hongrim asks for execution as punishment for his failure, but the king refuses, saying he would not have survived without him. Soon after, the Yuan dynasty delegates and the royal council raise the matter of succession. They suggest crowning Lord Qiwan Hong as king until an heir is produced. The queen, angered, declares that they are overstepping by proposing someone outside the royal bloodline. She insists the young king must be given more time. That night, the queen chooses to stay in the king's chamber. It is then revealed that the king is unable to be with women, and instead shares intimacy with men. He suggests that the queen return to Yuan, sparing herself further humiliation, but she refuses to leave. The king then makes a shocking proposal. He asks her to conceive an heir through Hongrim, his most trusted guard and closest companion. The queen is stunned. Later, the king lies with Hongrim. He again raises the issue of the heir, urging him to sleep with the queen. Hongrim resists, uncomfortable with the request, But after little persuasion, he reluctantly agrees to fulfill the king's wish. The king enters the queen's chamber to calm her, knowing what is about to take place. After reassuring her, he leaves and ushers Hong Rim inside. Hong Rim enters reluctantly and sits on the bed. After a long hesitation, he climbs onto the bed and begins kissing the queen. Seeing how frozen and devastated she is, he stops, unable to continue. When the king learns that Hong Rim did not go through with it, he tells him there are only 2 chances left. Hong Rim asks why he was chosen. The king replies that he wants the child to resemble him. The following night, Hong Rim hesitates but eventually fulfills the king's command. The queen, however, remains still and silently weeps through the ordeal. The next morning, the king asks Hong Rim how it felt to be with a woman for the first time. Hong Rim answers that there is nothing to say and that he was only following orders. But inside, he is hiding the truth. Hong Rim and the queen meet again. This time, it's different. After his gentle touch, the queen begins to respond. The moment grows passionate, and their connection deepens. Their whispers of desire reach the king outside the chamber. He slightly opens the door and secretly watches, consumed by jealousy and regret, for he has never known such mutual passion. The next day, Hong Rim requests permission to visit Betrayal province to investigate the attackers from the recent ambush. He and his men uncover information, but during the discussions, Hong Rim drifts into thought, lost in memories of the queen. His second-in-command, Seong-ki, reports their findings to the king while Hong Rim lingers in the town. Later that evening, Hong Rim sneaks a glance at the queen before returning to his quarters, only to find the king waiting there. The king tells him he was worried about him. The next morning, the king visits the queen, who has fallen ill. Suspecting pregnancy, he asks her, but she explains she just had her period the day before. The king instructs his physician to give her honeysuckle tea. The physician warns that too much may not be good, noting that Hong Rim had already sent her some. The king pauses at the revelation. Hong Rim later visits the queen himself, checking on her health and gifting her the perfume sachet he bought from Betrayal province. Soon after, the king meets with them both and suggests postponing the consummation since it has weakened the queen. He asks for their opinion, but they reply that they will only follow his orders. Unbeknownst to the king, he had sparked a forbidden love between them, a passion that only death could silence. A formal assembly on consummation takes place. The counselors quietly mock the ritual, saying that if it were effective, the king would already have an heir. They argue it is time to enthrone Minister Ki Won Hong. The queen excuses herself from the gathering and secretly sends for Hong Rim. Meanwhile, the counselors approach the king and request that he perform for the people. Hong Rim and the queen meet secretly in the library and share a passionate moment. Afterward, the queen gives him a handkerchief she embroidered herself, asking him to always keep it with him. Before leaving, she tells him to meet her again at midnight. She returns to her seat just as the king continues performing, while the lords celebrate with hidden malice. During dinner with the king, Seong-ki arrives with news linking Lord Ki Won Hong to the recent attack. Hong Rim and his men later spy on the minister's camp and overhear them plotting to overthrow the king. That same night, the queen waits in the library for Hong Rim, but he arrives too late and finds she has already left. The next day, Hong Rim reports to the king. The king, however, tells him that Seong-ki has already delivered the news. He asks why Hong Rim failed to report immediately. He replies that he did not want to disturb his rest. The king questions when such formalities began between them. Later that night, unable to restrain himself, Hong Rim storms into the queen's chamber. She dismisses her maid, and the two lovers share another long, passionate moment that leaves them both exhausted in the end. After resting, the queen offers him rice cakes she made herself, explaining that in Yuan it is a tradition to give them to the one they love. While Hong Rim is consumed by his secret affair, Seong-ki flatters the king in an attempt to replace him as the favorite. But the king does not entertain it. The following morning, Hong Rim returns to his quarters and finds the king waiting. The king asks where he has been. He tells him that he was in the library studying war tactics. The king asks him to prove it by sparring with him. They fight with swords, and Hong Rim is defeated. The king tells him that true skill lies in the heart, not in books, and demands that he show loyalty from within. Later, Hong Rim sits alone in reflection, drinking tea. Han Baek rushes in to report that the ministers are meeting in secret, including Lord Tai-an, the queen's brother. They capture one of the traitors who confesses to the plot to kill the king and place Ki Wan Hong on the throne. The king orders Hong Rim to prepare a banquet where the ministers will be executed. He instructs him, however, not to kill Lord Tai-an at the banquet, but to execute him privately at his home. At the banquet, the ministers feast and celebrate. Soldiers suddenly enter the hall. The king angrily speaks of their treachery and orders their execution. The soldiers behead the ministers on the spot. Meanwhile, Hong Rim leaves to carry out the king's order against Tai-an, but when he arrives at the house, he cannot bring himself to kill him. The queen secretly meets Hong Rim in the library. She's relieved when he tells her that her brother is alive and is on his way to Yuan with his family. Neither of them realizes that Lord Tai-an has already been killed by Seong Ki, who has also revealed to the king that Hong Rim allowed him to escape. Suspicious of an affair between Hong Rim and the queen, the king devises a test. He summons them both to his chamber and declares that since they have failed to produce an heir, the queen will now try with Seong Ki instead. The queen is humiliated, while Hong Rim questions the king's reasoning. The king, speaking in a cold and accusatory tone, insists that his decision is final. Shaken, the queen later visits Hong Rim's quarter and begs him to run away with her. But he refuses, vowing to remain loyal to the king. He ends their affair that night, and in despair, the queen attempts suicide but fails. Hong Rim goes to the king, confessing his betrayal and asking for execution. When pressed about his feelings for the queen, he insists it was nothing more than lust. Believing him, the king forgives him and suggests he serve at the border for a time to clear his emotions. The king is relieved to have him back and spends time with him again. While painting, he tells Hong Rim that the picture he's painting is a dream he once had of them hunting together on horseback. For a brief moment, their old bond seems restored. On the eve of Hong Rim's departure, the queen's maid secretly approaches him with a message. The queen wishes to see him one last time. He refuses at first, until the maid reveals that the queen is pregnant. Unable to stay away, he slips out from the king's side that night and goes to the library. There, the queen worries if the king will ever accept the child, but Hong Rim reassures her. The two give in to their passion once more. But the king notices his absence and, realizing where he might be, rushes to the library. He finds them together. Enraged by the betrayal, he asks the queen for the punishment she thinks Hong Rim deserves. The queen takes the blame, insisting she seduced Hong Rim, but Hong Rim confesses that he acted out of love for her. Hearing them trying to save each other, the king realizes how strong their love is. In a fit of jealousy and fury, he orders Hong Rim to be castrated. The queen's cries for mercy and Hong Rim's plea to be killed instead are ignored. Soon after, the royal physician informs the king that the queen is pregnant. Determined to erase the truth of the baby's conception, the king commands Seong Ki to execute everyone who knows. The king then visits Hong Rim in his cell, persuading him to return to his side as if nothing had changed. But Hong Rim, broken and devastated, says nothing. Meanwhile, Seong Ki begins carrying out the king's orders. The queen, however, sends her maid to warn Hong Rim's loyal subordinates. They manage to free him from prison and escape the city with him. But at the safe house, Hong Rim discovers the queen is not there. His men admit she ordered them to lie that she was waiting for him, knowing he would never agree to leave the palace without her. Upon learning of the escape, the king demands to know Hong Rim's whereabouts from the queen. She denies having any knowledge, and in a fit of rage, the king orders Seong Ki to seize her maid. Days later, Hong Rim has recovered from his wound. Against the advice of his men, he prepares to return to the palace for the queen. His subordinates warn him that it is pointless, but he is determined. On the journey, however, he realizes the futility of his mission and reluctantly turns back. When he returns to their hideout, he discovers the worst: his men have been captured. At the palace, the king tortures Hong Rim's subordinates for information, but none of them betray him. In retaliation, the king executes them and mounts their severed heads on stakes at the palace gates, alongside the head of the queen's maid. To deepen the cruelty, he adorns the maid's head with the queen's necklace, hoping to deceive Hong Rim into believing she has been killed. Convinced the queen is dead, he vows to kill the king. He disguises himself as a soldier, slips into the palace during a celebration for returning troops, and hides, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside the palace, the king, weary from the festivities, retires to his chambers. There, he encounters the queen, who begs him to remove the heads from the gates. He dismisses her plea and orders Sung-ki to escort her back to her quarters. Before Sung-ki leaves, the queen warns him that once the heir is born, he will no longer be of use and the king will have him killed. She urges him to stop the king's madness before it is too late. If Lord Ki Won-hong takes the throne, she promises Sung-ki's life will be spared. Troubled, Sung-ki gathers his most trusted men and reveals the dangerous truth about the king, the queen, and Hong-rim. But before the plan can take shape, Hong-rim makes his move. He storms the palace, cutting through anyone who blocks his path until he reaches the king's chamber. Inside, he challenges the king directly. The two clash in a brutal duel, shattering the chamber around them. At one point, Hong-rim's blade tears through the king's prized painting, a portrait of the two of them hunting together. Seong-ki and his men arrive, but the king forbids them from intervening. The fight intensifies, and the king eventually breaks Hong-rim's sword and drives his blade into his shoulder, pinning him against the wall. In the king's final attempt to hold on to their bond, he demands to know whether Hong-rim ever felt love for him. Hong-rim answers no in a cold and mean tone. The truth shatters the king, giving Hong-rim the opening he needs. He drives himself forward on the blade and plunges the broken half of his own sword into the king's stomach, and both collapse to the ground. Hong-rim struggles back to his feet. He pulls the king's sword from his shoulder and staggers forward. Before he can take another step, Seong-ki drives a blade into his stomach. Moments later, the queen rushes into the chambers. Soldiers run after her, trying to restrain her as she breaks free and cries out in horror at the sight of Hong-rim. As she is pulled back by the guards, Hong-rim realizes that the king had not killed her after all. He turns his head slowly away from her and faces the king's lifeless body. Tears fall from his eyes as he gives up. Sung-ki quickly takes control of the situation. He declares that the king has been slain by an assassin and that the assassin has been killed. He orders the soldiers to remove the bodies at once and commands them not to breathe a word of what has transpired. In the closing scenes, the film flashes back to when Hong-rim and the king were young. The king is showing Hong-rim a view of the city, and he marvels at how beautiful the palace is. The king then asks if he would love to live with him there for the rest of his life, and Hong-rim agrees excitedly. The film ends with the king and Hong-rim hunting together, a reflection of the dream the king once had, as captured in his favorite painting. And that's the tragedy of a frozen flower. Loyalty, love, and betrayal carved into history. If you're still here, you're officially part of the royal court. So smash that sub button, drop your Team King or Team Hong-rim in the comments, and don't ghost me like the queen did. More forbidden love, more blood, more recaps coming up. Stay tuned.